Hello everyone, Austin with the Limestone Library here with another Chess Club video. I hope you enjoyed my last video where we talked about some king-pawn endings and some of the more intermediate rules that you need to navigate a lot of these tricky positions. Today I want to give you a few more puzzles where we will practice some of the rules that we talked about last time. As well as, well, I've included a few sort of tricky positions that are really easy to learn that I think are also going to be really helpful, and they'll help you with positions that are similar to these positions as well. So I think I have maybe 7 or 8 puzzles on the docket for today, somewhere around there. So I am looking forward to this. So this first position, we have white going this way. And our objective here as black is going to be, to sort of accept our losses. We are down a pawn, but that doesn't mean that all is lost. Some of the positions that I showed you last time, they were positions where white was up a pawn and white could win, but they couldn't win all of them. So this is something really important here. Remember, we talked about in king-pawn endings, you want to, if you're attacking, if you're trying to promote your pawn, you want to get your king in front of your pawn. You want to get the opposition, which, if you missed that in the last video and the video before that, we will talk about that today. We will be talking about that constantly. And then after you get the opposition, you want to shoulder your opponent's king so that you can push them out of the way and promote your pawn. So here in this position, we can get a draw here, because white's king is not in front of their pawn where it needs to be, or at least here. If the white king was here, we would be in serious trouble. Even if it was here, we would be toast. But in this position, with the king here, we are perfectly fine. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video, think about what your first move would be, think about some of your strategies. After you unpause, I'm going to ask you to pause the video a few times. I'm going to give you some situations here that you'll want to ask yourself. So the first move that I would play here as black is king to c7. You can also play king to c8. That move is also perfectly acceptable. And then the move here for white, it really has to be this move. And then what I would ask you here is pause the video and try to figure out, pause the video again, and try to figure out, okay, where should we move here as black, and why? Okay. So here, you want to follow, well, that first move that we did, that first, it had an idea behind it. We can call it a defensive rule, if we want to call it that. And that defensive rule is stay in front of the pawn. If white is trying to get their king in front of the pawn, we should absolutely try to put our king in front of the pawn instead, so that they can't do that. And that'll go a long way. Well, this next defensive rule is when you're defending in a king-pawn ending, if you have to move backwards, always move straight backwards. And that's very important. If you have to move backwards, you should usually not move backwards unless you're forced to. There are some situations where it's okay, but not unless you're forced to. So in this position, moving the king straight backwards is the only move. And the reason for that is, if we do go this way, or the other way, it's, we can show that too. If we do go this way, the white king can come forward and get the opposition. Again, they moved to a square where there is one square in between the two kings if you draw a straight line. Or I should say an odd number of squares, and that will get the opposition. Now we need to stay in front of the pawn, but then the problem is white has this move. We can only go here, and then white will move there and promote and get a queen. Sure, they can make a mistake and mess up, but we don't really want to depend on that. We want to play the best moves possible. So, and the same thing if we go here, they go there. And that's all she wrote. So, we have to move straight backwards. And then the next situation that I will give you is, well, what if we push forward anyway and we do this move? Which direction should this king go? Pause your video. Now, When you're attacking in a king-pawn ending, and you have the pawn, you want to get your king on the opposite side of the pawn as your opponent's king. This is important because I'll show it, I believe, in the next puzzle. It boxes your opponent's king out, and they can't approach the pawn or the squares that they need to be on to defend. So it would follow that when you're defending, you want to move your king to the same side of the pawn as your opponent's king, and then the rest of the game will play out like this. White has to move here to defend the pawn, and then we have a stalemate and a draw. So black has succeeded in defending. If the black king goes here, white goes here, and white controls every queening square, and black has some issues. So that's what I mean. Having this white king on the opposite side of the pawn as the black king here is very effective when you're attacking. So the last question here for this puzzle, okay, so we've moved back. The last question here for this puzzle is, well, instead of moving here, what if the king goes here? What do we do then? Do we shuffle over and go face to face with them like we did last time, or do we do something else? Pause your video. The answer here is, well, if you do go here, then you run into the same problem. White moves forward, gets the opposition. You go here, white pushes, and then you lose. So we don't want that. We don't want to lose. So if the white king does go here or here, doesn't make a difference. It's symmetrical. We want to come forward and once again follow that first defensive rule. Get in front of the pawn so that white doesn't. It's that simple. And then if white decides to get the opposition, this time it doesn't really matter because they're behind their pawn. So we can just go straight backwards and repeat the position. And that's all there is to it for that one. So if you got all those, pat yourself on the back. Let me know if you got all those. I want to hear about it. Okay, next one. White to move. White is going this way. How does white win the game? Go ahead and pause your video. Now here, we will follow most of what we learned in the last video. And I talked about it at the beginning of this video as well. The first thing that we need to do is get our king in front of the pawn. And then, well, we've already done that, so that's nice. And then we need to get the opposition. So that means that the first move should be this. We move to a square that when you draw a straight line in between the two kings, there is an odd number of squares in between them. Okay, so black has one of two moves. It doesn't matter what they do. Let's say they go here. What do we move next? Do we get the opposition again, or do we do something else? Now, here it's very important to follow that third step. We must do what's called shouldering. Black would just go back and forth on these two squares all day long if they could, but we want to take away this square from them so that they can't do that. So we're not going to go here and get the opposition. We already got the opposition. Now we need to shoulder and control the queening squares. All of these squares so that this pawn can just march right on forward. And now it doesn't matter what black decides to do. We're just going to keep on pressing along, and we're guarding that pawn. So that's all there is to it for that one. Attacking can be a little bit easier. If you're in the driver's seat, you're doing all these canned moves where you move your king in front of the pawn, get the opposition, and then shoulder the king. And there's not really a whole lot that black can do here. Okay. On to the next one, and this one is sort of a new one. We haven't really talked about this. We have two edge pawns here, which we kind of talked about last time. We talked about how difficult it can be to promote a rook pawn. And so that's going to be important because, we said last time that if black got in the corner, or even near the corner, we would not be able to promote a rook pawn. That is a useful hint for this one. So in this one, there's also something, I would say, a little bit new. So go ahead, pause your video, think about how we're going to do this. Do we move the pawns, or do we move the king closer, or do we, do some combination? So if you said move the king closer, you are correct. Black has the move there. And then once again, if you said move the king closer, you are again correct. And it doesn't matter which one we move to here. We just need to get closer. Okay. Black, in this position, has to move here, and this is very important. Black cannot go here, because then we queen. Safely, which is useful. If we queen, then, well, it's game over. We can just go ahead and perform an overkill mate, like I showed in my second video, maybe? I don't remember. It would have been second or third. I think it might have been the third one, actually. Or was it the first one? Was it in the resources? I don't remember. Watch all three. The important thing here is this position. And you can use this pawn structure in other endgames as well. That's extremely important. So there might be something else going on in this area of the board. I'm not sure what. I've had positions like this in games, and maybe you can set up this kind of structure. This structure freezes your opponent's king. If you have the same number of pawns as your opponent, you both have, let's say you both have like 3 pawns, something like this. If their pawns are not passed, if you have a pawn, blocking 2 of their pawns or something like this, and you have this structure and you have these passed pawns, you will win the game. You can just leave their king be, and you can run over and go eat up all their other pawns. They can't chase after you, and they can't take this pawn, because then you promote. So it's a very useful position. So with the black king, we have to go here. White will move forward. And same thing here. All 3 of these squares work. And then black will move forward again. And this is a key position here. Once again, pause your video. Figure out what you're going to do. Now here, this is what I meant here when I said that we're really going to have to remember that we can't promote a rook pawn here. And this is what a lot of people get tripped up with. They try to promote both pawns. They see, okay, I have 2 pawns, I want 2 queens. You don't need 2 queens to win, you only need 1. So what people might do is they might move their king here, and then maybe the king moves back, and then they push forward, and then to their horror, they realize that they have stalemated their opponent, and it's a dead draw. Not a dead draw. I shouldn't say a dead draw. It's game over. So it's not even a, you can't even say that it's a dead draw, it's hopeless. That just ends the game. So come back here, and instead what we need to do is remember, we cannot promote the rook pawn. Therefore, we should sacrifice it. Make this king move, so that we didn't have to move, and now we have this very commanding position where we can move to both squares. And you can move to either one, but this one is more accurate. It keeps their king in the corner of the board. They move, we push, king moves, push forward, and there you have it. We took care of it. They'll go here, you'll promote to a queen. They keep going, and this is another interesting position that I will say, I want you guys to take a look at too. White actually has a move that they can do, a sequence I should say, where they will checkmate in 2 moves. And this is important for the endgame because it highlights a very important way to think about the endgame, I would say. So go ahead and pause your video and we'll talk more about that. So a lot of people, when I tell them that they can mate in 2 moves, the first 2 moves they try are king here or queen here, sorry. And these just simply don't work. If you do king here, they go king to h4, and now you have to checkmate them on this move. Well, we can't do that, so that doesn't work. It has to be a mate in 2. I mean, it doesn't have to be. I'm just saying for this puzzle, if I tell you to mate them in 2, you should try to mate them in 2. It is possible. So the other move they try is this. Well, then the king once again goes to h4, and now we cannot checkmate them in 1 move. So that's a problem. We have to come back. We have to figure out, okay, how do we solve this? Well, in both variations, the king went to h4. So you solve it by stopping the king from going to h4. Keep your queen on this strong rank. Remember, we talked about that in the overkill checkmate video. We always want to, when we're checkmating a lone king, confine it to the last file or rank. This is a file. I misspoke. And what you want to do is play queen to g3, which stops the king from going to h4, which is what messed us up in the other 2 variations. The king has to go here, and then you can checkmate them here, or you can do the cooler one and checkmate them here. Both work out just fine. So I like that. It's a really nice way to think about both the end game and when you're analyzing the games that you've played as well. You know, maybe you'll go 5 moves in, your position's fine. 6 moves in, your position's fine. You get to move 7, and you're like, well, okay, that's not so fine. I'm not very comfortable anymore. Well, look at what your opponent did. Look at the move that your opponent did. And then the move that you probably should have done is prevent that. It's a very great way to analyze. So, okay, 4 more left. Black to move here, and we always have this problem in the chess community. It's a funny little ongoing joke when you're looking at endgame positions, because you always cycle through endgame positions and you get a new position and there's not very many pawns on the board, so nobody knows which direction the board is or which direction the pawns are going. It's very confusing, and even masters make mistakes and they're like, oh, I just didn't realize. It's difficult. So again, I'll say this pawn is going this way. We're playing black, so right now we're in check right now, so we have to get out of check. So pause your video. How do we get out of check, and how do we hold on to this game for the draw? Okay, so here we're going to follow again one of our very important defensive rules that we talked about earlier in the video. When you're forced to move backwards, always move straight backwards. Definitely don't go forward here. That is for sure a poor idea. You can try to defend this and then not good. White's promoting next turn, so don't do that. Some of you might try this because it looks like, okay, let's get the king in front of the pawn. Well, not so much here. Now you're once again in this rough position. So the best move is to go straight backwards, like I mentioned previously. And yeah, white just has nothing. It's a dead draw. They can try to advance with the king, but this is a stalemate and a draw. They can push the pawn, but once again, we go here in front of the pawn. And now the only move that defends the pawn for white here is a stalemate. If they go anywhere else, we'll just take the pawn. So that's all there is to that one. It's a nice one. It's short, sweet, but it's a little bit tricky. And you could find yourself in this position. I've seen that position at least 2 times in tournaments that I've directed just over the past few years. So it does happen. It's not uncommon, we'll say. Similar position here. White to move. We're going this way. This is like the original, the 2-edge pawn puzzle that we looked at before, but instead this pawn is forward instead of being back here, and this pawn's back here instead of being up here. So think about what we talked about. Think about the guidelines, the little rules of thumb that we mentioned, and pause your video. See if you can get it. So same thing here. The rook pawn cannot be promoted. So in my opinion, the most effective way to take care of this is just to go here, sacrifice the rook pawn, king has to move there, and then we push forward, and we will we get to promote. And it's funny because you get the exact same thing where we get this position again, and we get the cool mate in 2. So that was not on purpose. It's just it's not an uncommon pattern, so it's nice. So this will certainly work. You may have also said this move, which will also work, because then the king goes here and then you go here. This is perfectly acceptable as well. I think it's a little clunkier because now the king can run away, and well, it's just a little bit harder to checkmate. It'll take a little bit longer. I like it when they're confined on the edge and you can just do a couple moves and you're good to go. So that will work as well. If you did say this move, I'm sorry, it is another stalemate. King pawn ending. It looks like a good move because you want to do this next move and you want to checkmate on the next move, but black is not in check, so they can't lose the game, and they don't have any legal moves to make, so it's over. It's a draw. Yeah, king pawn endings they're really tricky. This looks like a natural move to make. Looks like a good move, but this is how it is with king pawn endings. They're tricky. Sometimes the natural looking move doesn't always work, and they're very sharp. So if you make a mistake, it could everything just blow up, and then it ruins your whole game that you worked so hard to get the full point for. So, all right, 2 more here. We have black to move in this position. White is going this way. Pause your video. Where do we go to properly defend here? All right. So here, it is mandatory. We don't have multiple solutions in this one like we did in a few of the other ones. A couple, maybe. It is mandatory that we go here. And you might be wondering, well, why don't we go here? If you draw a straight line in between the two kings, there's an odd number of squares in between them. Why doesn't this get the opposition? Well, it does get the opposition, actually. But the opposition isn't everything. Remember, when you're attacking, you could have the opposition and still draw if your king isn't in front of your pawn. So same thing here. You can have the opposition and still lose if you're not in the proper position. Remember, when we're defending, we want to get our king on the same side of the pawn as the attacking king. So it's very important to do that. And also, I would say, having this basic opposition, where it is a straight line and not the diagonal opposition, it is frequently more effective in doing what you need to do. Not always, but very frequently. I would say over 90 to 95% of the time. So, although we will come across puzzles that basic opposition doesn't quite work, and those are nasty puzzles, very, very dastardly. But those will be much later. Okay, so after this move, well, white doesn't have opposition, so it's really hard to figure out what to do. They don't want to push the pawn because, well, then their king's not in front of their pawn anymore, and it's a dead draw. So maybe we'll go here. Well, as black, we should follow them. Continue to get the opposition. Same thing here. If they go backwards, push forward. You know, don't let them have that ground. Take it away from them. Get the opposition, and it's at this point that they might try to push the pawn forward. As black, we have to just stay in front of the pawn. Pawn push here. We'll move straight backwards. These two moves draw two, but when you get to this position here, and you're right at the edge, here you must go straight backwards. Again, in this position, when you're not on the edge of the board, here, it's not mandatory to go straight backwards. These two moves work as well. But you really should just get in the habit of moving straight backwards, I would say. You don't want to be flirting with disaster there. So this is not too bad. Straight backwards here. Already had my arrow, and then, you know, even if they go this way, we'll just follow them. If they push, we're good to go. You know, we've seen this before. And if I went too fast for you, I just want to encourage this practice section is excellent. I've said it before in a different video. This practice section is excellent. These first two sections of pawn endgames, key squares, and opposition they're just great. So I would really recommend taking a look at this. You know, if it did look like I was going too fast, you know, you weren't really able to follow anything, or as much as you would have been, that practice section will really help you out. All right, last one. White to move here. White's going this way. And some of you might notice, maybe I shouldn't give the hint. Maybe let's have you pause the video and we'll give sort of a small hint afterwards. Okay, so some of you might have noticed here, it's very subtle, but if you notice, there's a rule here that we talked about last time. And if you notice that this was a knight pawn, congratulations. That is very observant. You may have also noticed that this pawn is very far advanced. And if we get our king to this square, we can set up a knight pawn exception. So that would be very nice. But how do we do it? Well, white goes here would be the first move that we should try. Now, you might be wondering, well, why can't we push this pawn? I will refer you back to, I believe it's this puzzle, not that puzzle. This one? Yes. I will refer you back to this puzzle. This is this puzzle, which we gave it for black, and black was supposed to give the draw, and they just have to go straight backwards and they get the draw. and that's all there is to it. However, in this one, it's the same position, but like, it's in a different corner. So you just turn the board. If you have a board at home and you're following along with pieces at home, which I highly recommend, that would be very proactive. You just turn the board and it's the exact same position. I'll give you another look at it. Same position, same colors even. Sometimes I switch the colors just to mess with you. But same colors even. And, well, yeah, if you push the pawn, black just goes straight backwards. That's a stalemate. If we push the pawn, black goes here, and we stalemate. There's nothing else that white can do to get that win. So we must play king f7. Black can only move here, and then we need to reset ourselves to prevent black from going back here, because they want to kind of shuffle between these two squares to get a stalemate. Well, black can only go here. And now instead of going here and then allowing black to get back to h7 like we talked about, we have to take the edge of the board. Okay, black stays on the same side. White pushes the pawn. Again, these are all... Black doesn't really have much of a choice. I think they had a choice earlier. They could have gone here or here, but they're going to stay on the same side. But all of these are black's only moves. After you push the pawn here, you then move forward king to h7, and you have it covered. You'll get a queen, and you'll win the game if you know your overkill checkmates. All right, that's all I have for you today. We will be doing some harder king pawn endings next time. I have a few cooked up for you guys. If you thought these were hard, great. I'm glad that we're continuing to challenge you. But I have some really tricky ones coming next time, so I'm really excited about that. Summer reading is coming up, so stay tuned for that. We do have our we won't be doing any in-house programming, unfortunately, due to the pandemic situation, but we do have our Beanstack software that we're using for e-programming, and we will be continuing to post programs and videos on the Facebook page. So please let me know if you would like to see any programming videos, but certainly if you have any chess ideas for videos, I'd be happy to hear about them. I will post as always, I will post my email and Chess link and chess.com profile links. Send me a message if you have any ideas, programming, chess questions, if you want to play a game, anything under the sun, and I would be happy to help you out. All right, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.